Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual roundtable on strengthening the safety net for survivors through collaboration. I am James Butler, and I'm from the Office of Family Assistance in the Administration for Children and Families. On behalf of my colleagues here at the Office of Family Assistance, the Office of Child Support Enforcement, and the Family and Youth Services Bureau, we are delighted that you found time in your schedule to join us today. Our virtual roundtable today will be focused on defining family violence, discussing good cause, highlighting examples of excellence in collaboration, and highlighting promising practices that support families. We're going to have a pretty full agenda today, which will include an opening plenary, 4 breakout sessions, and a closing roundtable. Session topics range from defining family violence, explaining good cause, and highlighting examples of excellence across the nation. We're going to start with an opening plenary on family violence and accessing and applying for public benefits and work supports, challenges and solutions. Then we will transition to 4 separate breakout rooms, which we will go over the logistics shortly for selecting which breakout rooms and how that will work. Our 4 breakout sessions include, in session 1, as you should see on your screen, discussion around building good relationships with DV coalitions and programs. Session 2, promoting disclosure and safety for victims accessing child support. Session 3, establishing good cause. And session 4, family violence with Native American populations. After those sessions, we will then transition back to our separate breakout rooms for our closing plenary on state and local tandem child support programs of excellence. I will now turn the floor over to Steve McLean from VLH Technologies, who will provide you with an overview of the technology and how you will select your breakout rooms, engage in dialogue throughout the chat function, and submitting your questions and answers and other nuances. Steve?
Thank you, James, and welcome everyone. We're excited about this virtual roundtable with the opportunity for you to join together in general plenary sessions and also to separate into breakout sessions where we can have more specific and more interactive conversations. To do those things, we need a couple of favors from you. First, if you look at the poll at the top of the screen, we would need you to all select which breakout session you would like to attend. At the close of the first plenary, we will be assigning folks to the breakout sessions that they select. So we need you to weigh in and decide which discussion you would like to attend and contribute to, and then you'll be assigned based on that information. The second part is we've noticed that many of you are not connected to the webinar via your phone. And the phone is the only way that you can attend the breakout sessions that you select. So the best way for you to dial into the webinar platform is to use the green phone icon, which is at the very top of your screen. You see a green phone icon right above the poll question. Click on that and select Connect My Audio. Then you'll be given the option to enter the phone number where you can be contacted by the system. And we will call you and include you into the webinar via the audio. And then you'll be able to attend and listen to the breakout sessions of your choice. You'll also see various screens that are available. There is a Q&A screen in the upper right-hand corner. Feel free to submit questions during the presentations and also during the various Q&A sessions that will occur. And we will forward those to the presenters and have those addressed during the Q&A sessions. There's also a handout that can be downloaded. You'll see in the middle right, which will be of use during the opening plenary, and they'll tell you more about that. And then, of course, there is a chat box at the lower right-hand corner if you have concerns or would like to make general comments or record some notes based on the information that is being provided. Please feel free to do so. We are excited again to have you. And again, I want to make sure that you understand that you need to select your breakout session using the poll at the top of the screen and connect to the webinar platform via phone using the green phone icon at the top of the screen. Thank you, and I will turn it back over to Lisa to introduce our opening plenary.
Thank you so much, Steve. My name is Lisa Washington Thomas, and I am the branch chief for the Self-Sufficiency Branch in the Office of Family Assistance. And we're the federal agency that administers the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, TANF program. Our opening plenary is an interactive presentation and discussion with our two speakers, Dr. Janet Mickish and Krista Del Callao. Leaving an abusive partner is only the first step to a full recovery from domestic violence. Survivors need support in accessing and applying for public benefits such as TANF, housing, employment, child support, and getting other services necessary to become self-sufficient. Up to 74% of our TANF family participants report recent experiences of domestic violence, compared to 30% of the general population. For survivors of domestic violence without financial resources, TANF and other public benefits provide a financial separation from the abuse as well as a bridge to independence. According to 2015 data from the National Survey of Children's Exposure to Violence, approximately 1 in 12 children witnessed family violence in the past year. Ensuring access to public benefits for both parents and children are essential in creating the optimal outcomes in the aftermath of domestic violence. As our presenters speak, please post your questions in the chat box that Steve just described at the top right of your computer. Now let me introduce our speakers. First is Dr. Janet Mickish, and she has been involved in family violence prevention and intervention at the grassroots, academic, government, and policy levels for over 30 years. She has worked at and consulted with a number of battered women's programs across the country and was the executive director of the Colorado Domestic Violence Coalition for approximately 9 years. Also, we have Krista Del Callao, who is a policy manager at the Texas Council on Family Violence. Her work focuses on researching, analyzing, and promoting laws, policies, and options that expand the critical social safety nets for survivors of family violence, with a particular focus on immigration remedies, housing, child support, and health. So one other thing I wanted to tell you, thank you for joining us today, and I will turn this over to Dr. Mickish.
Thank you. And right now, Krista, I think will lead us off.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, my name is Krista Del Callao, and Dr. Mickish and I are excited to present this open plenary for you all today. Because we have just a very short amount of time before everyone breaks out into the sessions where you really get to strategize and hear from state folks that are leading some of this work, we are going to provide just a very satellite view of what domestic violence is in terms of dynamics and discuss some goals, challenges, and solutions for public benefits and other programs that can be of critical assistance to survivors. What we're going to be talking about today is, first we're going to try to understand just who's in the meeting room, and then we're going to move on to defining and describing the dynamics of domestic violence, the connections between domestic violence and economic stability, and that leads into how public benefits can offer some really great great benefits and opportunities for survivors of domestic violence and their families, but also do present some risks. So given that, we're going to explore what considerations that these systems might need to have that are administering these programs, and conclude by returning to a scenario that Janet's going to present to us. At the beginning of this plenary and this virtual meeting today, we just want to remind everyone that we're coming at this from a wellness lens, from looking at where you're situated within your agency in terms of your role and thinking about what you need, and not coming from a deficit model. In no way is anything that we're presenting or any of the breakouts intended to be a critique. It's really intended to be an opportunity for growth in all of our work, both in the advocacy field and in the field of program services. And I'll conclude the introduction by just sharing this quote from Futures Without Violence, which is a fabulous national resource on a variety of levels around domestic violence issues. And it really talks about defining success, because the complexities that come with working with families can be oftentimes frustrating and very fatiguing, and we might feel like there's not really real success from how we might define it. But if we look at success as being measured by our efforts, our work to reduce isolation and to improve options for safety, then we really can see how most of our work is really going in that direction. And if we're working in that direction, then we are successfully implementing these programs. Janet?
Thank you, Krista. Right now, I'd like to know who is in the room. So in the chat box, would you just type in your state so we have an idea of who is in the room? And just a couple of seconds to do that. Missouri, Texas, Colorado. Yes, and I even recognize some of the Colorado folks. Wyoming, Kansas, Florida. Wow, what a great cross-section. Vermont, Michigan. Excellent. New Mexico, District of Columbia, Massachusetts. Excellent. Okay. It looks like a wide variety of states are represented. That's awesome. And the next question then is, what is your work? And there is a poll. And can you, yeah, great. Would you please check one of the squares? Who are we talking with?
And folks can check more than one if your work encompasses multiple of these programs.
Excellent. Thanks, Krista. And there may be overlap between them. Okay. And for you folks with other, could you, in the chat box, tell what the other is so that we can gear the discussion to you, to the total population that's here. Great. Coalition, perfect. Okay, so most of the others are coalitions. Tribal Youth Program, excellent. Excellent. Okay. OCSE, what is OCSE? Maybe you could
That's the Office of Child Support Enforcement.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay, got it. Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, that gives us a good idea. So nobody from SNAP or unemployment. Oh, no, one from each of those. Okay, great. So the next question is, what do you want us to focus on? Because we could, as you know, we could go on for weeks on these topics. So checking all that apply, what do you hope to gain? And great. Could you, and again, you can click more than one. So whether you want to work directly with survivors or you are working at a systemic level or administrative level, and again, check all that apply. so that we know how to gear this. Okay, excellent. So mostly the system change and administrative decisions. Okay, give you just another. Okay, we have a good idea here. Okay, thank you. And we can remove that. Great, thank you. So in order to facilitate our discussion together today, I have included a scenario. And if you would download it from the download handouts here on the left, excuse me, the right side of the screen, it is just a general scenario. There is no typical domestic violence scenario, but this is a general one that I thought could cut across all our plenary as well as each of the breakout sessions. So I'm not going to read that to you, but it simply has Sophia, 21, and her current husband, Mo, who is 30, an ex, Al, who's 36. Sophia and Al share are parents to Abraham, and Sophia and Mo are parents to Ava, who is 2. And this is not unusual for folks who come into TANF. Now, it may be somewhat unusual for people who come into SNAP, since there are some different requirements, but I thought this, and unemployment. So this could be a scenario that we can share over time. So just as we're going through this, you might review that scenario. What I wanted to talk about is what is domestic violence, so that we're all on the same page. And as we know, whoops, I just lost connectivity. Okay, here we go. I'm on now. It just popped back. As you know, there are many different definitions of domestic violence. Some of them have to do with the criminal law, some civil law, and some individual rules in your programs. And what we do know from that is that states have adapted different definitions of domestic violence. For the purpose of this discussion today, we're going to interchange domestic violence, family violence, and interpersonal violence. So because there are so many different definitions that people have and so many different terms, the federal TANF uses family violence to denote interpersonal violence. And, well, I just lost connectivity again. Oh, and it came back. Sorry about this. What we do know, too, is that definitions, the criminal is the most narrowly defined, whereas the public health and social service advocacy is more widely defined. And it's more widely defined so that we can intervene and provide services and resources at earlier stages to customers who need them. And criminal law is narrowly defined to ensure that people know exactly what is required or prohibited. So they have very different functions. So for our discussion today, we know that we're going to use the concept that domestic violence is a pattern of coercive behaviors designed to gain power and control over an intimate partner. And that power and control takes a variety of forms. And even though it's a pattern of coercive behaviors, there is always a first time. And what we have found also is as we increase public awareness about domestic violence, people are coming in at earlier stages, and our human services agencies can provide resources to perpetrators as well as survivors and their families in order to intervene earlier and to provide resources. So it's coercive behaviors, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And it's designed to gain power and control. And the power and control is also related to it could be that the perpetrator wants to gain power and control to divert attention from their internal strife. It could be that they are sadistic and their violence is a way to satisfy that. It could be that they think they have a duty and a responsibility to discipline their family. So there are a variety of reasons that they would want to gain power and control. And an intimate partner is defined in various ways in each state. And basically in Colorado, it is a married or unmarried partner who well, I'm not going into the details of what's an intimate partner in Colorado. That we'll discuss that later. But just thinking about, it's not a parent-child or a child-parent. It is not siblings. It is intimate partner. And if we think about coercive control as a tactic, it is a strategic course of conduct that the violence, coercion, intimidation, isolation, and control are used to intimidate and exploit, to deprive of basic right. And coercive control could be verbal. It could be financial. It can be threats. It doesn't have to be physical, although it could be. And if we think about what, you're probably all familiar with this, the power and control wheel. These are some of the basic categories of power and control. And thinking about when a customer comes into your agency and you are doing the screening and or the assessment for whether they are a survivor of domestic violence, it is important to look at each of these categories and how they may manifest with individual survivors and perpetrators who you may be dealing with. And if you even think about that, these usually don't fall out in discrete categories. That using emotional control could also include using the children, could also include using isolation. So if we look at this in a more dynamic way, we realize that domestic violence is not an event. Domestic violence is a life experience. Domestic violence permeates the family in a wide variety of ways. And generally there are cycles and patterns that occur in domestic violence relationships. And you've probably seen the phase one, the hearts and flowers, and then the tension building and explosion and battering and remorse as patterns and cycles that occur in the family. If you look at that not as a circle but as a life process, what we can see is that different perpetrators use different tactics at different times in order to gain and maintain that power and control. And the relationship may start out at a comfort level and everybody's happy, and then verbal abuse, threats, abuse of property and pets, physical abuse, etc., happens over time. So that, and this one slide is crucial to understanding that when we're talking about screening, screening is not an event. It is a process because people's lives change, situations change, tactics change, and survivors' action, interaction, reaction, proaction changes over time also. And so a survivor or a perpetrator may come to you at any point in this entire process. And it's important to listen to the story that they are telling about their lives and to build relationships with the customer so that the customer feels comfortable in revealing information about the real information about their lives and not the Better Homes and Gardens version or the Ain't It Awful version, but provide you with information that you really need in order to make an assessment, do the screening and making an assessment. So moving on then to Krista.
Yes, thanks, Janet. And so when thinking about all of those different patterns, cycles, and dynamics that compose what we call domestic violence, it's important to recognize that anyone could find themselves as a victim of domestic violence. It cuts across all different social and identity lines. It cuts across class, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, religion, immigration status, etc. Sometimes we like to sort of other victims of domestic violence so that we can feel safer that it wouldn't happen to us because we're not like X, Y, or Z, but that's just not the case with this unfortunate and really problematic social ill. And sometimes it looks like domestic violence is more of a feature in certain cultures than others, but it's important also to recognize that it might look different in different cultures, but every culture has some elements that condone domestic violence and some elements that resist it. But it is going to look different in terms of the characteristics depending on the setting where it is. It's also important to recognize when we're talking about this that even among this virtual meeting, we have a high level of faculty here. We have over 100 participants, that there are survivors among us. And so sometimes hearing and discussing these types of themes can be really difficult. And so I just encourage everyone to really take care of yourselves and also to be reflective if you're responding to content or discussion in a certain way, and just to be mindful of that. The other piece in which everyone can be victimized, it's important to mention, even though domestic violence does cut across all of those lines I mentioned, where someone falls in terms of identity in a certain culture really can impact their ability to come out of a violent relationship. So because we live in a society that has different lines of structural oppression for different groups, it may be increasingly more difficult for some victims coming from certain racial, ethnic, religious, immigration status backgrounds to actually escape violence and seek help. So it's important to recognize that those different layers of identity can impact both help-seeking behaviors and how fruitful those opportunities may be. So in thinking about the impact, and again, everyone is impacted differently. So it's very much like trauma. So the impact of trauma is very individualized to the person themselves. But we do know, particularly when thinking about mothers who are victims of domestic violence, that there are significant impacts to their health. There can be significant impacts to their pregnancy outcomes, as well as to the children's cognitive and emotional development and physical health. And this can be because children have been exposed to domestic violence, so they're in the room when it's happening, or they're in a household that's consistently tense and fear-provoking, or it can be that in utero that the mother was just in so much stress from that relationship that can also have an impact. There's a lot of new research out around the neurobiology of trauma and things that can happen before babies are even born because of the level of stress of the mothers. Of course, domestic violence is going to have some level of impact on parenting and on the overarching family safety and the social supports that are available. One of the cornerstone tactics for batterers is to isolate victims and to alienate them from their networks of support. And so a lot of times the presence of domestic violence in a family really does eat away at that access to social support. The other important thing to mention when you're thinking about health consequences of domestic violence is, like Jan said, domestic violence largely is not a physical or sexual abuse event. Most of the time it entails all of these other emotional, verbal, and coercive controlling tactics. And it's important to recognize that those psychologically abusive tactics actually have a more profound impact on behavioral health than even physical abuse does. So women that identified as being psychologically abused were more likely to be depressed, to use substances to cope, and to develop chronic mental health illness than women that were physically abused.
And could I interject right in that we, with this slide, we know that you cannot separate physical abuse from emotional abuse, that every physical act of physical abuse results in an emotional and psychological consequence. So hitting is not, quote, better than yelling at someone or criticizing them, because allegedly the bruise will heal. And that is pretending as if that hit did not have an emotional consequence. So, and as Krista rightly pointed out, the emotional yelling, screaming, criticizing, demeaning, etc., has physiological consequences, and we are finding out more and more about the intersection and the consequences to our physical, emotional, spiritual well-being as a result. Okay.
And when thinking about the fact that most of the people that are participating in this meeting are working with families, it's important to note that in families where domestic violence is present between the adult partners, they're 2 times as likely to have a substantiated case of child abuse. And substantiated case means that child welfare concluded that there was a realistic and valid threat of child abuse or neglect in the home. And there's an increasing amount of attention being paid to what exposure to domestic violence does to children for the child welfare field, and also for all of us, because I think that anyone that does work with families, even if they're not working for the particular child protective services in your state or for the federal government, we are all part of the broader child welfare community, because we are all in this to make sure to enhance child well-being and resiliency and stability moving forward. And there are real impacts to family ecology that are caused by perpetrators of domestic violence. So the perpetration of domestic violence has impacts on the other parent's parenting. It has impacts on just what's happening in the family, because it can oftentimes result in loss of income, housing instability, isolation, as I already mentioned, and different types of disruptions. And all of these can lead to harm to children, even if they're not being directly abused by the perpetrator. And moving forward from sort of the family impacts and health impacts, we're going to talk a little bit more about the connection with economics. So what we know is that financial resources significantly impact women's decision making. So when they're determining whether to stay or to leave an abusive relationship, finances are oftentimes the most heavy weight in that calculation. And we know from research and just from our work with survivors every day that one of the main reasons why women stay or return to an abusive partner is because of lack of financial resources. And so again, as I mentioned before, though domestic violence does cut across all class lines, it's important to note that domestic violence often leads to poverty. For victims that weren't previously impoverished, the experience of domestic violence and then everything that happens afterwards if they have to leave and all of those costs associated with that oftentimes leave them in a much less financially stable situation. And poor women have higher rates of domestic violence, experience higher rates of domestic violence because of their inherent increased vulnerability to violence, because they have fewer options and because of those financial resources. We also know that domestic violence is the third leading cause of homelessness in our country. And so when we're thinking about the type of disruption, trauma, and financial disaster that an episode of homelessness can have for a family, we know that domestic violence is a huge driver of that issue.
So moving to can you help and then will you help? Those are two separate questions for your agencies. Can you, and we're going to talk in a moment about some things Colorado has done to eliminate barriers, systemic barriers to customers coming in, to survivors coming in, and then to the barriers to disclosing, how we have addressed that. And then the other one is will you? And part of that is what is your program's goal? And really to think about that. What is your program's goal? And one of the things that we have worked with here in Colorado is thinking, what is our goal? Is our goal work participation rate? Is our goal that customers receive benefits? Is our goal that customers thrive after participating in our program? What is our goal? And in order to really serve survivors of domestic violence, first of all, looking at your goal, and do you really want to know? Because my experience in working with a variety of professionals, they don't want to know because they don't know what to do or say. They don't know what their resources are. They don't know how to respond. And they feel that there is no adequate resource for the survivors and their families. And so thinking about what is your program goal, and then does that goal lend itself? If you were to walk into your agency, would you know what your agency is for? Would your customer know what the agency is really for and what the goals are of the agency? And that includes the ambiance, the pictures on the wall, the greeting that from the front desk person, the way that customers are receive information and interaction, etc. Is it trauma informed? So not only what is the goal, but does every single aspect of your agency work toward that goal? So, well, so thinking too about the customers who walk in, they will have experienced trauma in their lives. They will have experienced trauma in their lives, and so is your agency trauma informed? So current help-seeking behavior is guided by the past help-seeking behavior of the customer. The abuser has told them generally that there is no help for them. What is happening to them is their own fault, is their responsibility, and if they just would buck up, everything would be okay. And so that shrinks the pool of potential helpers that the survivor thinks are available. And then, if indeed that customer goes into an agency and it doesn't see a support system there for them, or thinks that there is more danger, then that customer is, in some cases, likely just to turn around and walk out, especially in TANF, when the first thing that a number of workers do is say, so, you know, you have to participate with child support. If you're not going to participate with child support, you are not eligible. And so how you even frame that and what resources are available for the customer are important. So looking at this slide here about when a customer comes in and thinking about the level of and severity of domestic violence that they have experienced and what the perpetrator has told them, you see how much red is on here? They see danger, danger, danger. So the worker may be seen as dangerous, and the agency is dangerous. And so it's the worker's responsibility to help increase the green area so that the customer feels safer and safer when applying for benefits.
So as Jen mentioned, there are both opportunities and risks within the programs that y'all represent today for survivors. And I'm going to talk a little bit specifically about the child support program. Many survivors have risk and concern about participating with child support will increase contact with the abuser, and that would lead to harassment and more abuse. And that first part is typically true, that if the abuser is the parent of your child, engaging in the child support process, application process, and establishment will most likely increase contact with that other person for that process. The other fear survivors have is that their information will be revealed and that they might be located. And again, that's a very valid fear, because without asserting that they need some level of protection and the child support agency flagging their case, their information could quite easily be revealed to outside parties in court documents, etc. What we also know, though, is from a recent research study is that 90% of survivors indicated that they wanted to pursue child support if they could do so safely. So the will is absolutely there. There's just a high level of concern about what the process might entail. We also know specifically about the TANF program that survivors of domestic violence have difficulty with compliance with all of the different program requirements, that those really present barriers to their ability to successfully work the program that they're supposed to and continue to receive benefits because of sanctions for noncompliance. A general fear and concern that some survivors might have entering into any of these governmental assistance programs is that they're all large-scale, they're administered by large-scale federal and state and county agencies. And so there's a good deal of data that's out there about these families that can seem really scary for someone to have out there in the ether. There's a lot of staff that may have access to someone's information. And just on an individual level, as we're moving more and more to online applications and checking of status levels for different public benefits programs, if a survivor's computer use is being monitored, that itself could put them in jeopardy, that they've been looking at or applying for certain benefits and assistance programs.
So some of the program requirements have risks to them, as Krista just pointed out. It may be unsafe for the survivor even to go out into public. Transportation is often a problem, not only in rural areas where transportation may not exist at all, no public transportation exists, and it is very difficult for some survivors to get a car, or they have to barter with friends and neighbors and others to drive them even to the Department of Human Services, which may be located in some rural areas, maybe 20 miles away from their home. And so how does the survivor get there? And in urban areas, you may have a couple of kids and small children, and some buses do not allow strollers on the bus. So that can be extremely difficult. And also the notion that program requirements are only around work, and that isn't necessarily true. There are a number of program requirements that may also involve coming to the office for interviews, may involve going to an agency for counseling or going to an agency for job search, etc. So, and in addition, the customer may be involved in a variety of systems related to criminal justice investigation of the survivor for some issue, as well as the perpetrator applying for protective orders, going to domestic violence programs, as well as perpetrators repeatedly take the customer, the survivor to court over and over and over again, and report them to social services and report them to a variety of agencies, so that the customer is engulfed in social services and human services and legal agencies. So, and the risk that the customer may feel walking into a Department of Human Services to apply for food or TANF is that if the worker found out that there was domestic violence, then there's the fear of involvement of child welfare. And so then being involved in yet another system. Also, some perpetrators who may be on probation have requirements that they are required to provide child support, or they're required to do particular things with the survivor that may be not in the best interest of the survivor. So the survivor is having to deal with that also. So there are multiple issues. Even in the face of everything that Krista and I have talked about, with all the challenges and risks for the customer, still approximately 75% of the customers who come into Department of Human Services for TANF are 75% of the women who come in to receive TANF benefits are or have been survivors of domestic violence, are current victims or survivors of domestic violence. So I think that is phenomenal that a full 75% make their way. And so if you think about the probability of any one customer sitting at a desk is a survivor, the odds are pretty high. But for survivors, letting the worker know that they are a survivor may not be important to them. What they want is, they want money, they want a job, they want services, they want support. And they may, at least at initial application, may not think it is important for what they want out of the program to disclose that information. And indeed, even throughout the program, it may not be important for them to disclose that. And in research also shows that in 75% of the cases, the customer will not reveal at initial application that they are a survivor of domestic violence. And in many cases, that's okay. That not until a relationship is built through the case manager or other systems, is it important for them to reveal that? So one of the things I emphasize is that the worker is not trying to get the customer to confess. The worker responsibility is to help the customer feel safe and supported to achieve economic security and not force the issue.
And as Jan mentioned, it is striking that for a program like TANF, which has the most restrictive eligibility when we're thinking about the different federal public benefits, and the highest level of program requirements associated with it, that you still are seeing survivors disproportionately represented in that population. And so we have to really think that there are probably a significant amount of survivors within all of the different programs, and that are maybe involved with your program, for instance, the child support program, because of their involvement with the TANF program or the Medicaid program. So we say this all because even though we've mentioned some real risks and some concerns that survivors have highlighted about the programs and the application processes and the requirements, advocates for survivors of domestic violence have overwhelmingly cited the critical nature of the resources of TANF, of SNAP, and of unemployment compensation. And so this data that you're seeing here is initial data from an updated Not Enough survey, which was conducted by the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. They did a previous one a couple years ago where they talked to both survivors and advocates about their participation in different public benefits programs. And just this last year conducted the same survey and added some new benefits such as unemployment compensation to it. And the data is very similar, again, that advocates on behalf of survivors really do underscore the critical nature of these programs and their importance in the lives of survivors. And then in terms of some of the qualitative information that they've got, I think one of the good quotes, I won't read them all to you, but is that for those that need these programs, it is the difference between surviving and not surviving. And then access to benefits programs contributes substantially to victim survivor empowerment and post-trauma healing because it enables victim survivors to take steps towards addressing or remediating the trauma they've experienced while their basic needs are met by the benefits programs. So really just knowing that just your programs that you're associated with in and of themselves are doing good work to support survivors and their ongoing safety and stability. And it's just so important that we recognize that and that survivors are going to be drawn to these programs when they have that need. The last quote I'll read, and as you all know from the chat box that Steve said, you will have access to all these slides, that they saw that more than 2/3 of the respondents to this survey said that domestic violence victims rely on TANF to help address their basic needs and establish safety and stability. So again, this recognition that these programs, particularly cash welfare programs, really do serve as a bridge to independence and safety for many, many victims. So knowing that, the federal government and our states and counties have recognized, okay, we know that domestic violence is an issue among our customer base. And so there's been a variety of responses from the federal level, and then states have had an opportunity to enhance and build upon those. So for the TANF program, we have the family violence option that allows for waivers to various program requirements, such as paternity establishment, child support establishment or enforcement, and work requirements. For the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, previously called food stamps, there's an ability for a survivor of domestic violence to waive their participation, require participation with education and training services. Child support, the system, the 4D system has the family violence indicator that protects that person's information within the federal parent locate system. And other states have built upon and sort of enhanced what the family violence indicator means and does, as well as what they offer to survivors in their child support programs. The unemployment compensation programs, a variety of states have enacted laws that provide access for survivors of domestic violence that have left their jobs because of safety to be able to access unemployment because they did lose their job for no fault of their own. They just weren't, that wasn't a voluntary quit. And along with some of these more policy or legislative approaches and responses to survivor safety within these programs, programs also have enacted a variety of training requirements for staff on domestic violence. They have confidentiality and privacy protections of varying levels within their systems, and some have protocols around screening and referrals. So when we're really thinking about crafting effective responses to the fact that survivors are in our system, and it behooves us all to make sure that our systems are safe and helping families move towards stability and thriving, there's a couple key elements to cite to what that requires. And it requires universal education about the protections and resources that your program actually offers. So like Janet said, a lot of survivors don't intuitively think that they should tell their TANF worker or their child support worker about domestic violence. They are going to those agencies for financial support. And so they don't identify those agencies as domestic violence resource agencies. And so unless they know that protections and options exist within those programs, they're most likely not going to disclose. And that's really important information to maintain the safety of that particular survivor, her family, in the community, and for that office. It's also important that, as Jan mentioned, that screening isn't a one-time event. It's an opportunity. It's a process that we create and institutionalize opportunities for disclosure that are safe. So it's not just, well, they didn't check that they had an issue with domestic violence on their application that they filed, so we're never going to sort of revisit that again. That throughout the process, even after the establishment of a case, people have an ability to provide this concern, and it will be responded to in an appropriate and relevant way. The other thing is that we need to make sure that our frontline staff feel confident in providing referrals to domestic violence services and other services to survivors and their families. And that confidence oftentimes comes from a system having a very solid policy or protocol and training for their employees, so they do feel that comfort level. So how do we make those types of things happen? Well, first, like Janet mentioned in the very beginning, you have to vision for success. What is your goal? If your goal is safe, thriving families, then start there and then think about what types of system shifts and regulations or administrative enhancements are going to be required. And I've worked for years and years with our Office of the Attorney General, our 4D agency here in the state of Texas, and we've made leaps and bounds for survivors of domestic violence, but it is incremental. It doesn't have to happen. If you're sort of seeing some of these Cadillac programs, and Janet will tell you about her work in Colorado and saying, well, that's not going to happen this year for our system. No, but really vision out, and maybe you can make it occur within the next decade. So working step by step to increase the competency and the safety of your system. And that really can happen through making sure that your workforce is trained and feel like they have capacity to respond to this issue and support. And also it comes from meaningful partnership building and engagement. And meaningful means that you don't just have the number of the local domestic violence programs somewhere in a stack of paper on someone's desk, but that you actually know as a system who that program is. you talk with them and consult with them, and your workers feel a comfort level in providing that referral and resource. And the other piece is that you're responsive to feedback and shifting as needed, because sometimes moving forward, you might see that this actually didn't accomplish what we were intending to. So you might need to go in a different direction, but being reflective and open to that feedback loop from your customers and from your partners as you're engaging in this process.
Thank you, Krista. I would now like to talk a little about Colorado's system and some of the advancements we've made over the past 10 years. And like many states, we receive federal TANF funds, and we combine that with some Colorado funds. That money is assessed by the state and county committee who decide how much money goes where in the state. Then the state administers. So the state supervises the funds and policies, rules. The county administers. So we have 64 counties administering TANF funds in 64 different ways, which is a challenge in a number of respects. However, it also offers a number of opportunities. So if we look at what's happened in Colorado over the past 10 years, our vision is that customers thrive. In order to do that, we have several principles. One of those principles is that we want things to be evidence-based. So we have not only done research, national, state research on what works and when and how, and developed logic models, etc. We also continually interact with our counties to determine what is working and what is not working, and continually make changes to enhance what is real for the customer as well as what is real for the county. We also know that we have a double bottom line. We need to meet work participation rate in order to receive federal funds. We currently are meeting work participation rate. Our work participation rate is around 30% at this time. We also know that just handing out money or services, resources to the participants is not good enough. The customer has to be better off when they leave us than when they entered. And that means we are looking for them to achieve economic security. And from a study that is currently underway, approximately 42% of the leavers, of the people who leave Colorado Works, which is our TANF program, are employed. And they are also employed at least a month to 2 months later. And we continue to do research. So we are looking at the double bottom line. And we've done this in 3 basic ways. We've done a lot of ways, but we'll go with the 3 basic. And I'm just going to point out a few of those because time is limited, and if people want to talk more about them, I can do that later. We've changed our rules. Our rules reflect what is required federally, and if it's not required federally, then we don't do it. We also have county policies. We outline, we give the county information about what policies they need to have, what categories of policies, and then we provide them a format and some of the required elements of those policies. And we are very clear it's about benefits and services to the customer to enhance their ability to thrive. And we also, wherever possible, talk very respectfully about our customers and that they are our customers, and we have the privilege of serving them so that they can achieve economic security. We also provide 60 months of benefits and services. Most customers are 18 months, but we do provide the full 60 months. We do not have a birth cap, and part of that birth cap is that we recognize, especially with survivors of domestic violence, that being pregnant and having a child may not be their choice, because sexual assault is such an integral part of much domestic violence. So to have a cap would penalize them. We also have minimum verification. The minimum amount that it takes to verify that you are eligible and that you continue to be eligible and that you are participating in program activities is what we require. And that reduces burdens not only on the customer, it also relieves burdens on the workers so that they can focus on establishing eligibility and doing the case management. We have currently, as of this summer, 100% child support pass-through, and there are some conditions around that, but basically 100% child support pass-through. We have transitional food for people who go off TANF to avoid the cliff effect. We also have transitional child care for a year after you leave TANF. So those are some of the regulatory things. And also we've adopted address confidentiality program. And we also require individualized plans. And this is an individualized plan in the customer's words. And that, what Krista was mentioning earlier about recovery from trauma, we focus on this is the customer's plan in their words to reach goals that they want to achieve. That goes a long way to increase their sense of efficacy and decrease the trauma and help them participate more in their program. Then in terms of systemically, as you can see, the collaboration, not only the collaboration with the counties, it's also our county partners. And that includes programs that work with schools and other community agencies, domestic violence programs, and also across agencies that we have now aligned in a great deal with food and med and other programs, so that we have, once you are eligible for Colorado Works, your benefits are basically set for 6 months, and unless, and you just have a few requirements of reporting requirements about if you have a change in household comp, etc. But then those programs during that 6 months recertification period, then they align with the other programs so that you only have to report to one entity so that your food, your med, your Colorado Works are in alignment and you're not reporting to multiple entities. Our database, we realigned that to be streamlined. Streamlining the process. We do statistical tracking and evaluation and provide that feedback constantly to our counties, and our counties provide it to us. We have integrated staffing of counties so that we can help them help the customers. And then in practice, most of eligibility, most counties are able to process and determine eligibility within 7 days. Many of them are striving for 1 day eligibility determination. We provide training for case managers and eligibility. We're working on training for managers and supervisors. We encourage appropriate waivers. We provide tools, just lots of desk aids and tools for folks, including we provide the family violence option screening tool, as well as brochures that are required to be given to customers. We do management evaluations. Our staff goes out to counties and does a full evaluation, and part of that evaluation is whether your staff has attended the required family violence option training, which is 1 day long, and whether your case notes indicate that this person, from the evidence provided, is this person a survivor of domestic violence, and if so, has your county delivered appropriate resources and services to them. We also have regional representatives and technical assistants, and we encourage self-care and we celebrate our successes. So that's like 8 minutes of encapsulated of a 10-year work, and there's much more, but I think that is the tip of the iceberg. So thinking about what's your goals, our goal is that customers thrive, and using a variety of strategies, we have increased our ability through regulation, system, and practice to achieve our goal of customer thriving.
All right, and we just wanted to share a couple resources that you are probably already familiar with, but if you're working in a system outside of a local domestic violence program, we want to highlight that the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day. They always have bilingual English-Spanish advocates on the line, and they will connect to a language line for any language need. They also have a chat function now available on their website, thehotline.org. There's also a whole helpline that's dedicated to younger people, so the 14 to 25-year-old population. It's called Love is Respect. Again, people can chat online at loveisrespect.org. They are able to call, but typically most of that age range likes to chat, or they can also receive their information and peer counseling and referrals through texting, and that information's there. I also failed to include on this slide that we have a new Strong Hearts Native helpline that is geared towards serving the Native American community around domestic violence issues, and that you can look it up. It's Strong Hearts Native Helpline, and their number is 1-844-762-8483. So particularly for those of you that are working with significant Native populations, or you're part of a tribal program, that's a great resource to tap into, and their staff can also come out and provide training. And just to sort of, as we're closing up, remembering that defining success, sometimes we don't have sort of the perfect program right away, but that if we're working towards reducing isolation and improving options for safety, then we're doing successful and meaningful work on behalf of survivors and their families.
So thinking about the scenario that I provided earlier, think about Sophia and the children and Sophia's level of trauma and the children's level of trauma, and how your agency might deal with Sophia and her family when they come in. And the breakout sessions will cover this information more.
All right, and our contact information is there on our slides that y'all will be receiving, but we really wanted to say a big thank you for everyone that is participating in this virtual meeting today. It's really exciting, and it's great to have both DV advocates as well as administrators of these important programs that are really engaged in thinking about these issues.
Thank you, Jan and Krista. It was so important the information that you shared, and I didn't get, Krista, the statement that you make, but it resonates with me that, if your program is not where you want to be, continue to make incremental steps so that you can help a family to thrive. And I think that's just a wonderful way for all of us to think about the work that we do. So thank you and Jan very much for your presentation. I'm going to turn this over to Steve so we can stay on time as he discusses and transitions everyone to the breakout.